Introduce my former SeaWorld trainer, Samantha Berg, if she can come up here. And I also want to mention that when I first started researching this story, I was, confounded and scared by the story of Dawn Brancheau, and was reading about it in the media and hearing about it. And one of the best articles that I read that kind of, I think, was a portal to me making this documentary was an article called Killer in the Pool from Outside Magazine, and it was written by Tim Zimmermann. So my very first phone call that I ever made about making this documentary was to Tim, who came aboard as my associate producer, and who I have the pleasure of introducing right now. Ready for your questions.
Absolutely. Well, just so you guys know, in just a minute, we'll want to hear from you guys in the audience, some questions and comments, so be thinking about those, get those ready. Just to kind of kick things off, let me ask you, and Sam, you can weigh on this as well, as you were starting to gather interviews in the process, did you find that people were extremely eager to share these stories or reluctant?
I think that people were ready to tell this story. I don't know that they were necessarily eager or hesitant. I just think that they knew the truth, and they were prepared to kind of impart that, and most of them had held on to it for quite a long time. So I think the time had come.
Yeah, there's two guys that really paved the way, and that's Dr. Jeffrey Venturi and Dr. John Jett, and those are the two people that Tim Zimmermann interviewed for his article. So they started speaking out first, shortly after Dawn's death, and although I knew really from the moment I saw the pictures of Dawn lying in the slide out in front of Tillicum that everything that the company was saying about how she died and the fact that they were blaming Dawn, that was not true, but it took me another 6 months to really get the courage to actually start speaking out. So I'd say Jeff and John paved the way for the rest of us, and then at a certain point it became like I knew too much not to speak. Like it seemed like it wasn't, like I couldn't hold on to it anymore, like it was important to start talking about it. And the more I started talking about it with like-minded people, the more I actually learned, and the more I was like, wow, I didn't realize that while I was a trainer, and then I learned more and more, and then I felt more compelled to speak.
Oh, wonderful. Also, let's talk about some of this incredible footage you have of some of these incidents. Can you talk about any of the challenge that may or not have been present trying to obtain the footage as well as use it in the final film?
It's always the most challenging part of a documentary. I think it's just trying very hard to find the footage, which is came from anywhere from people's personal sort of treasure troves and archives to historical stuff to someone who knew someone who had filmed something. So it comes, that basically is one of the harder parts, is actually finding the footage and then trying to clear it. I'm sure any documentary filmmaker in here understands that you have to go find who the master sort of owner of it is, and get the clearance that you can from that person. And if you can't find it, you have to invoke all sorts of things like fair use, which is a whole other ball of wax. So it's hard and it's incredibly time consuming, but it's worth it. So but definitely I think the hardest part of making a documentary like this.
Well, it's incredible and so powerful. It really just makes everything so effective to kind of actually witness some of these things that are described. You ready to open up and hear some questions and comments from the audience? Yes.
When I went online to get my tickets for this, and I was at AFI Silver Docs, and I wasn't at Blackfish, suddenly my screen went blank and popped up this thing, boycott Blackfish. Who was responsible for that? I mean, they was.
I don't know. I personally, from AFI, don't know anything about that.
That's another wow for me.
Wow, incredible. I haven't heard that yet.
Are you serious? Because I'm not particularly a computer user or anything. Nobody else got it?
Well, I'll have to investigate that if you said it popped up through our website.
I will investigate.
Someone will investigate.
Had you spoken to any of the individuals who were injured, who survived?
I tried very hard. Nobody is. It's almost impossible to find anybody. And I think that even if you do find them, they don't talk. I mean, I think we can all sort of do the math on that one of what might have happened after their accidents. But it was, I really wanted very much, and then for example, Ken Peters still works at SeaWorld, so anyone who's sort of within the confines of SeaWorld, is he Peters? What's his name? I'm making up words here. Anyone who still works there is sort of untouchable. So not only did SeaWorld decline an interview, but that accounts for anyone who still works there. But yeah, I mean, I wonder, Tim, if you tried to contact some of those people. I was always curious about that in for your article.
I tried to speak with as many people as possible. You saw the footage of John Sillick getting crushed by a whale. And that was one of 3 major incidents that occurred at SeaWorld in 1987. And I tried to contact all of those folks, but they've all entered into settlements with SeaWorld of one sort or another. Gabriela alluded to that. I did speak with one other guy who had been injured in one of those incidents, who also had a settlement, but for whatever reason he was willing to speak about what the incident was like. But I think probably after my article came out, he probably got a few emails from his lawyer, and he became scarce again.
The former trainers in the film, I guess like the ones in the boat at the end, you sort of touched on this, but did you guys leave because you were tired of what was going on, or is it like you left and then in retrospect and like more talk about Don's death and everything, was it like, oh?
It's really different for all of us. I mean, I worked there from 1990 to 1993, so that was what I happened to be there for when Tilikum arrived, as you saw in the movie. Mm-hmm. So I knew what I knew about Tilikum killing Kelty Byrne back then, but obviously I didn't know the truth about what happened.
Yeah.
So, and then I really left in '93. I realized that I needed to get further. I had an animal science degree from Cornell, and I'd been planning on becoming a veterinarian. So I realized that I wasn't really going to move very much further in the park, and I also thought there was maybe something I could do by going back to school and getting some kind of architectural or design degree. I could help the animals more by changing their habitats. I didn't go in that direction. I became an acupuncturist instead. But for me, I still didn't see anything wrong with SeaWorld in the way that I do now. I felt proud of my experience at SeaWorld. It was something that I would talk about with pride. I felt like if you had to be a killer whale in captivity, SeaWorld was not a bad place to be. In fact, it really, if you have to be a killer whale in captivity now, it's still a much better institution than, say, like the Miami Seaquarium or Marineland in Canada. But for me, that wasn't the case. But even though I saw a lot of things that I questioned, I think other people came to those conclusions. John Jett, in particular, in the movie, he became really disgusted when he was asked to start the working Tilikum on the artificial insemination program. It's when Tilikum started becoming basically nothing more than a sperm bank. And I think that was the last straw from him, and he spoke out, and he was moved to the Sea Lion and Otter Stadium and then quit shortly after that. So some people left feeling like, the bad taste in their mouth. Other people left thinking they were going to go on and do other things and maybe come back. But a lot of us in the movie left, years ago. But then you have John Hargrove, who left. He actually read a paper that Jeff Venturi and John Jett wrote. It was called Keto and Tilikum Express, the Stress of Captivity. You can find it on the internet. And he read that paper under duress. He was actually, some of his fellow trainers had said, you need to read this paper, and he didn't want to read it. For weeks he said, no, I'm not going to read it. And finally he sat down and he read it, and he said, well, everything that's in this is true. And so he started thinking about his position there, and I think that turned things around for him. But everybody left for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, right here.
This is a question for Tim. There are a lot of stories about animals and abuse and animals in captivity. And what was it about this one that pulled you in so far?
I think I reacted to the same thing Gabriela did, which is that I heard about Dawn's death. But if you do a little bit of reading about it, the first thing you learn about is that Tilikum was involved in previous deaths. And that made me realize, he had a life story. And so what intrigued me about the story was to try to tell the story of his life. I originally thought about it as Diary of a Killer Whale, and the aim was that a reader would read about Tilikum and his life and come away understanding, or at least having some sense of why he might have killed Dawn Brancheau. And so I think killer whales are obviously beautiful animals, and the more you learn about their intelligence and the way they live in the wild, the more intriguing they become. So I just thought it was a great story about the relationship that, man and entertainment has, with a very highly intelligent animal, and I wanted to try to explain how man and Don Brancho's life and Tillicum's life came together with such tragic consequences.
Yes, right here.
This is going back to the filming of the last moments with Dawn. How were you able to find that footage? And can you comment on acquiring it?
Yeah, there was a few people who had kind of filmed that last session, and there was a woman who lives in New Hampshire who happened to be there with her family vacationing, and she filmed that, and that ended up being sort of the big exhibit in court for OSHA, because this visitor happened to capture this on tape, and I was able to contact her, and through Tim actually, and she made the video available to me. So, it was kind of luck of the draw, I think, in terms of some of the footage. A lot of it was due to the fact that OSHA was taking SeaWorld to court. A lot of stuff kind of became available via FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. So that was kind of an entry point to the footage for a lot of it.
I'll just add one quick thing to that, which is, interestingly, that family, which filmed and documented the whole incident, was never interviewed by the sheriff's office in Orlando, and had to persist in trying to get a statement filed with the investigation. And then when others went back and looked at who was interviewed, I think something like 37 out of the 40 witnesses that the sheriff's department interviewed actually worked for SeaWorld, and they interviewed very few guests who were there watching the whole thing unfold.
Yes, way in the back.
I just want, do you have to know how many of these parks there are around the world?
Ooh, I don't know. I know there's 45 killer whales in captivity, and I think is it like 7 countries? I just read that statistic, and I can't remember. It's like 7 countries and 13 parks, but I could have that wrong, so I have to get back to you on that one. But there's only 45 killer whales in captivity right now, and I think it was about 13 out of that number have been captured from the wild. That's rough.
So there's a belief. I mean, there's a lot of potential for growth in China and Asia, and SeaWorld has been talking to Dubai about opening a park, and Russia has just issued permits for 10 wild captures. So we'll see where those whales go.
Yes, in the back there.
Hi, so I'm just wondering what you see in the future for these captive marine mammals, and what you'd like to see, and what we can do to get involved.
Sure. So one of the things that we tell people when a lot of people ask that question after you see this movie, what can you do? And so one of the easiest thing you can do is just don't buy a ticket. Really simple, don't go. And that's going to put pressure on SeaWorld to change their business model. I mean, none of us in the film feel like SeaWorld's a $2.2 billion company, so the likelihood that they're just going to go away is not very high, but they could use their powers for good, So if they have pressure from the public and people are saying, we're not going to go until you change your business model, you stop using these animals, exploiting these animals for entertainment purposes and making money off of them, and change to something that's actually educational. Take everything they've learned about veterinary care and use it towards rehabbing animals. Like they do a great job with manatees. They do a fantastic job with rescuing turtles. There's so many animals. The facilities could be put to good use, and they could do actual education. So, and the other thing is that putting pressure on them to stop the breeding program, because right now they are breeding animals in facilities that are in some cases almost 30 years old. All of the 3 Shamu stadiums were built starting in the mid-'80s. So they're old facilities, they're not very big, and they're making more and more whales. So there's not a lot of room for those animals, and as Tim was saying, there's expansion going on all around the world, so there's potential these animals are going to be sold to other parks, which is not a good thing, because as you see what happened at Laurel Park with animals that were not socialized properly, the moms don't even know how to take care of the babies in some cases because they didn't have moms to take care of them. So those are really the major things, and then educate yourself. If you guys go to Voice of the Orcas, it's a Google site, and me and 4 other trainers have started this site, and it's kind of a clearinghouse for information. Tim's article is there. David Kirby's book, Death at SeaWorld, is linked there. He wrote a book that really chronicles a lot of the backstory from things that you saw in this movie. And there's tons of scientific papers there. There's lots of information that you can go and educate yourself and learn about what's going on.
Yes, right here.
Who owns SeaWorld? Is it privately held? Is it a publicly traded corporation? Is it part of a larger enterprise? Where does the money go?
It's currently owned by the Blackstone Group, which bought it from Anheuser-Busch for $2.1 billion. But they also, just this year, in fact, they had an IPO to open up some of the ownership to the public, and it went spectacularly well. So I think in some ways SeaWorld, which identified this movie as well as some of the other books and articles that have come out recently as a business risk, is feeling quite comfortable with where they are. Their attendance is still strong. Their profits are growing over the last year or two. So just in terms of their reaction to this movie, I think they might be in a position where they feel like they don't really need to do too much.
That's kind of what I was getting at. So there's no corporate parent that could be pressured. This is not a small part of some giant.
No, well, I mean, it's a private equity group, but one funny thing happened, which is because they had an IPO and people buy shares, PETA and lots of other activists bought shares so they can go to the shareholder meetings and ask some questions.
Folks, we have time for one more question before we have to wrap up. Yes?
I was wondering, of the 45 killer whales that are in captivity, do you know how many of them have kind of like injured trainers, or we saw several examples in the movie, and some of them were telecom.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but almost every single animal at SeaWorld at least has a profile that describes what the whale's behavior is like, what their likes, what their dislikes are, and I've looked through those profiles, and even the most benign whales, even the ones that, they would call them beginner whales, that people would start working with those, even those animals have their bad days. But a whale like Kasatka is, that you saw in the movie with Ken Peters. I mean, she's unpredictable in predictable ways, actually. So there's trainers who are more comfortable working with her. There's another whale in the collection named Orchid, who specifically I've been told by a former trainer that, he'd be more frightened of working with her because she's completely unpredictable. You can never determine why she goes, quote, off behavior. So, she'll just do it for fun. So all of the whales have their individually unique personalities, and all of them have had something that's happened over the years that they've been in captivity. I'll speak for the SeaWorld whales. I don't know about the whales outside of the company. I don't know specifically about Lolita at the Miami Seaquarium or Kiska and Marineland either, but most of the whales have had some sort of thing happen between trainers. And the one thing is that, unfortunately, a lot of these incidents do not get reported. Because, as you saw in the movie, there's this culture of blame the trainer. Because if it's the trainer's fault, it's not the whale's fault, and then it's not a dangerous job. So you can see going down that road. So it's often that accidents will happen and trainers will fail to report if it didn't occur during a show and nobody was filming it. So there's probably tons more things that have happened. If you go on the internet, there's a list of actual incidents that were witnessed by people, and you can see that there's over 130, I think, now, but those were all filmed. So, so there's plenty of stuff that happens even with whales that are not, considered as risky.
Before we wrap up, I just want to remind everybody to use your ballots and vote for the Audience Award and drop them off with volunteers. Thanks to all of you for being with us, and thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, AFI Silver Docs. This is the world's best festival. Thank you.